Okay. Thanks, Heather, and welcome everyone to the CIFFC Fire Management Additional Conversations. This will be the second last conversation of the season. The last one does not yet have a date set, though it's likely going to be May 31st. And it's going to be based on the novel First Nations Wildfire Evacuations, a guide for communities and external agencies, by Tara McGee and Amy Cardinal Christensen. So we've got that to look forward to. But without further ado, we'll move on to today's conversation, which is about rate of growth sensors, killing frogs in the name of science. Presenting for us today, we've got Yanik Freeman and Kris Johnson. Yanik Freeman is the owner of Advanced Sensor Research Limited, who designed and developed fire frogs in partnership with Yukon Wildland Fire Management. He's also helped automate many of the systems used by them for situational awareness in his role as systems administrator with Community Services Yukon government since 2015. Kris Johnson is the Senior Emergency Response Officer for the Yukon with nearly 40 years of fire experience all over Western Canada, including British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Northwest Territories, in addition to the Yukon. Besides working for fire management agencies, Kris has also been a fire researcher with the Forest Engineering Research Institute of Canada, and has been involved with the CIFFC Fire Sciences, Meteorology, and Information Management and Information Technologies committees. He was also a co-founder of the Red App Initiative and is a former chair of the Wildland Fire Behavior Specialist course. When he's not playing his trade on fires, Kris enjoys travel, family time, playing music, cycling, and near-death experiences. And with that, over to Yanik.
A bold introduction, my friend Matt. Kris Johnson here starting off. Just can you confirm you hear me at this point in time, Matt?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Fantastic. And I'd like to throw down that for anyone listening that I've also played some songs with Matt Coyle. So that's kind of nice getting an introduction from an old alumni of mine. So yeah, thank you everyone for dialing in today and logging in. Kudos on your team's prowess. We're going to talk for the next 45 minutes about the forward rate of growth sensors. We're calling them FROGS as an acronym. We have this little tagline, killing frogs in the name of science, and I think Matt Coyle is the only person that said it out loud. I keep adding it to poster presentations and stuff, and it always quietly gets dropped. Our love of amphibians is strong within the wildfire community. But moving forward into it, let's talk a couple quick house ground rules. The first one is, because we're in the Yukon, we've got low access to technology, so we can't actually see any questions that are put into the chat. As we're going through this presentation, I'm hoping there's gonna be a bunch of questions that are gonna come up. And since people are kind of shy about asking them at the end, if something hits you during the presentation, throw it in the chat line, and Matt's gonna keep track of that, and he will circle back at the end of the presentation for us, and we'll do our best to answer those. So, what is a frog? Well, everyone knows that measuring the rate of spread is kind of an important deal in wildland fire. Whether you're doing prescribed burn operations or wildfires, knowing how fast that fire is going is one of the holy trinity. You know, we want to know what type of fire it is, we want to know how intense it is, but how fast it's going really impacts a lot of things downstream. Like, is it going to bump into a cabin? Is it going to bump into a community? That type of information really helps us manage the fire, as it dictates what our operational response is going to be. Tricky bit is, and this is speaking from personal experience, it's really hard to estimate how fast a fire is spreading. And that's where these little sensors come in. So as we go through this presentation, I'm going to talk a bit about the context of, why the Yukon, of all places, is working on developing this technology. We're going to explore the idea. We're going to talk a bit about its evolution. And we're also going to do sort of a navel gaze looking to the future, because I think it's kind of exciting. If you stay through the whole 45 minutes, there'll be probably some terrible music references and a few dad jokes coming out. And in addition to the whole conversation around frogs, I'd like to explore the idea of the role that operations plays in fire science and innovation. So I think that's something we quite often miss. There's always this sort of flavor that, that there's a dichotomy. If you're in operations, you can't do research. Or if you're in university, if you're an art student, well, you can't obviously hang out with a science student. And I'd like to dispel that. The cartoon up in front, this is a classic piece of hubris that always plays out. Who needs science? We just need to go to prep level 5 and I'll get a bigger fire truck and we'll just keep pushing forward. The problem is we know that does not work very well anymore. Like we've seen the examples, I worked in Lytton for a lot of years. I spent some time down in Australia when it was burning. There is a time Mother Nature is going to win, and it's not going to be a bigger fire truck that's going to move us forward. It's going to have a better understanding of fire behavior. So as we go through this whole presentation, I'd really like to do my best to knock down that dichotomy of, oh, this is operational research versus fire research. I don't know. I just want to talk more about the process of, innovation and just how we could actually work together. So leaving behind the poor resolution cartoon, let's go on to the next slide. Bunch of names up in front of you. Right now, in Canada, we are undergoing the biggest renaissance in the fire research community I have ever seen. There are more people engaged in it, more people poking different corners, looking around. CIFFC is actually super respectful of this. The people up on the screen, you can probably recognize the name for your agency. If you have questions about what's going on, hit them up, ask them questions. I know if something pops up, that might be going on in Saskatchewan, I'm going to reach out to Kris and Greg Walker, tons of great stuff going on in Parks Canada. When you first look at the screen, it's an easy breakdown. Like some people look at it and they go see very large agencies and they've got their own science sections and they've got massive resources. You've got academics, you've got Canadian Forest Service. You've got small agencies like, Danny Goddard's probably more like the Yukon, a bunch of people stand around the end of a hose going, do you start the pump? But what I like about looking at this list up on the screen right now and the whole science committee as a whole is that everyone on that screen has something to contribute. Every agency, every university, every researcher, and we're all adding to the canon of knowledge. And I think that's important because it ties back to the idea that there is no one person that owns research or innovation. It's only by working together we actually move forward. Webinars. As Matt said, this is the second to last webinar. When I signed up for it, it was the last webinar, and I actually fought for this position because I thought, there is some amazing research going on right now, and webinars are a great tool to get that information out, but unfortunately, they tend to happen in the winter. Now that we've crossed into April, what we're seeing is a lot of our seasonal people are back in, and hopefully at least 7 of them out there listening into this presentation. And those are the people I want to reach out to because I think that if we can get more people engaged in asking questions and bringing new ideas forward, that's going to help guide how we move forward into the future. So if we can get more people playing with that, that would be fantastic. Had I known May was an option, I would definitely have signed up for that one. All right, so let's throw ourselves into it. First bad musical reference. I think it was Bob Marley, the fire ecologist, that said, if you know your history, then you know where you're coming from. And a lot of people wonder, why is the Yukon, a place that doesn't have its own science section, working on developing these new sensors? How does that come about? And I think you have to put it into context. Whereas, our friends in Ontario have an entire science section, or BC's got predictive services. Well, we've got Gold Pan Sam, I think his name is, Yanik? Yeah. Gold Pan Sam. And I was showing this to Yanik. He goes, what is this slide about? What's that slide of Sweden up there in Fort McMurray? And I put it up to put it in context for anyone listening in. So I expect at least 2 people out there have not been to the Yukon, or at least not fought fire in the Yukon. The Yukon is almost the exact same size as Sweden, which is, not massive, but it's a pretty big country. I like running Husqvarna, so I've got some affinity there. So it's a fairly large sized area, lots of diversity and stuff across it. And I put Fort Mac up there because it's another sort of touchstone of mine. Because if you line up all the kids in Fort Mac on one side of the street and put all the kids in the Yukon on the other, they'd have the population they'd have us outmatched by 20,000 people. So when you look at the Yukon, we've got a massive area for very few resources. Everyone in the webinar is nodding up and down except for Matt. He's going, ha, Northwest Territories, we got them beat. But I understand his pain. I got to work there for a while. With Yukon, we've got some resources. On our left, we've got Guy. You may know him from Yukon Trappers. We got some planes, and we got Dan Adams down the bottom. That guy can do anything. We've got some really, really good people in our program. But when you're dealing with that big of an area, it gets tricky to manage fires. In 20 seconds or less, I'm about to teach you everything you need to know about statistics for the Yukon Fire Pro. We get about 100 fires a year, so figuring out averages is really easy. What tends to buffalo people or make people curious when we dig a little bit deeper into it, we only fight about 20% of those fires or engage with them. About 80% of our fires, we either monitor or at best do some indirect attack on. And that's a different shift in focus when it looks at managing. Instead of putting fires out, we're trying to figure out where they're going to go and learn from them, and hopefully have them not bump into something important. But as Matt said, I've been working for a few different agencies now. I moved around, and I can honestly say fire is pretty tricky. That picture up in front of you right now, that's me sitting up north of the Arctic Circle, watching a fire blow in from Alaska, where I said, oh no, let's get it, streamline's gonna stop. And guess what? It didn't. There's me watching it roll across. But I kind of like that picture because it ties back into the fact that we don't have all that many resources, and we have to watch fire and try and figure out what's gonna do. If you watch fire, you learn about fire, and you start asking questions. Why did it do that? Okay, well, I have 24-hour sunlight going on this picture up here, bit of a drought type thing. It's definitely a fine fuel driven fire. And apparently those lichens burn really well. I don't know. You have to start asking questions. And I think the two fundamental questions for any research or fire behavior analyst is, I wonder why. You fill in the ... and you go, it kind of reminds me of, and you start drawing little parallels and you start bringing different ideas together. And that's where I think true innovation comes from. But I think we're rolling slightly off. Let's take ourselves back into the fire frog. Where did it come from? The idea was born back in the wildfire behavior specialist course. The slide up there right now has got a slide I think that's even right now in probably in our crew member courses through the national standard. Anyone that's gone through any basic type of fire training has seen this slide. Well, you have a fire moving and the in-draft winds pull from the front and they will pull fires in front towards it. Well, that's great. When I was doing this in about 2002, maybe 2004, this fire behavior specialist course, Terry Van Ness was teaching this. And, I burned a few trees, nowhere near as much as that man had. I said, but Terry, how do we know how far ahead that little pressure gradient extends in front of it? Being in class and being that he's an excellent teacher, he goes, well, Mr. Johnson, picture on the left there, we've got a little star. There's gonna be little curls. You go 5 minutes ahead of the curl, and that's where you light. And everyone in the class nodded and agreed, and the class carried forward. But I sat with Terry that night. I said, Terry, like that curl thing, yeah, I've seen it. You see little wisps coming off the column, getting pulled back down. Like, are you telling me you actually draw a plumb line down, figure out the rate of spread of the fire, multiply that by 5 and drop? He was going, hell no, Johnson. You drop fire on the ground and you wait till the smoke pulls back and you go, right. So he and I got talking about and said, wouldn't it be cool if somehow, either as an ignition specialist or a fire behavior analyst, if we could actually forecast or have a better understanding of how far that pressure gradient extends in front? Byram's already put forward the idea of the power of the fire and be able to calculate how much it's punching up. We have an understanding of how much air has to come in just to support that fire and keep that column aloft. Wouldn't it be wonderful if a fire behavior analyst could say, tomorrow during the peak of the burn, when you're doing ignitions, you're going to be burning approximately 250 meters to 300 meters off the head of the fire. As an ignition specialist, I would just look at the fire environment and sort of say, how can I use the environment to make my tactics more sound? Can I start my fire 250 meters off the head of the fire so that it starts backing into maybe a natural control line, be it a river or a lake, or maybe a road? There's lots of options if we can start planning ahead and being more strategic in how we go about doing our work. So I came back to Saskatchewan at the time, and I was listening to sort of Matt saying the Forest Engineering Research Institute of Canada, which is not an easy thing to say, who I was working with. And I met a fellow named Mike Fraser. Mike Fraser is probably one of the smartest, neatest people I've worked with ever. I wanted to put a picture up with him, but he looks too much like Mr. Bean, and we'd probably hit up for copyright infringement, and I couldn't find one of them online. I was talking with Mike Fraser about this great conversation with Terry Van Ness, and out of his mouth rolls the idea, great, we'll call them FROGS, and we'll throw them from aircraft. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, I don't know. Firefighters like stupid acronyms, man. We'll call them FROGS. He didn't even have an acronym at this point in time. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, imagine throwing frogs in a fire. And I said, damn it, sign me up. And I said, well, tell me more about your idea, Mike. And he goes, it's like lawn darts, which are no longer CSA approved. The picture on the top left. Well, these little lawn darts will drop down. And there'll be sensors. And they'll tell us all what's going on at the head of the fire. And I thought, man, that's a great idea, Mike. So we talked about this and figured out how we can make something like this happen. Fortunately, he was managing the entire radio telecom shop, and I was studying, community protection at the time. So we walked down the road to the University of Saskatchewan, and we sat with the mechanical engineers. Said, hey, can you build something like this or come up with an idea? So fourth year engineering class, and they came back with a bunch of schematics and stuff. And it was neat, but honestly, it was a non-viable product. It was too big, it was too bulky, and it could not actually really be produced. And we sort of stopped and looked at it and said, well, that was a darn good run. And we just sort of left it there. But the idea kept floating around. Scroll forward about 2008. I'm working in the Northwest Territories now because I apparently have a hard time staying in one place for too long. And the fellow on the left is Mark Ackerman. This man is a pyro, but he's also another one of those savant geniuses. He's with the Mechanical Engineering Department of University of Alberta. And he sort of took up the grail working with FP Innovation and said, it would be neat if we could make a little canister we could drop in front of the fire that could start collecting information. So what you see in the center there is actually one of the FP Innovation's reports you can actually download from their site. Circle back to Razim after this, the good folks at FP Innovations. And they put a data logger inside these canisters. And what they found is that, the data loggers improved vastly, but the actual canister didn't do very well being dropped from any height. They did some experimental burning. Some of the canisters got cooked up and didn't survive. The challenge with that is they didn't have a transmitter on them. They were also fairly expensive because they were still sort of prototypes at that point in time. And after the fire, you had to go back and actually physically find the actual unit to actually get your data from it, which really doesn't sort of meet my objective for, give me a quick rate of spread so I can say when the fire is going to bump into the community of Ross River. So that work sat for a little bit. Linking it all back to being in the Yukon, large vacuous space, not very many people, some big fires rolling around on our land base. We're only fighting about 20% of them, got very limited resources. Picture on the left. This is one of those anomalies. So here we are, it's probably about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. We have a crown fire rolling down the north slope in the valley, and everything in the FBP system says this should not be happening right now. What you don't see right behind Mark is between us and that fire is the Alaskan Highway. So we're sitting up on this hill, two old guys looking out going, wonder how long it's going to take to hit that road, and running calculations in our mind. These are all just by Gus and by Golly and estimates and stuff like that. That's a bit of a challenge. It would be nice to actually have a rate of spread of what that fire was moving. The other thing is on the right, you got like Singles and a bunch of other cool people coming up through our program. These are new officers. They've got different levels of experience and stuff like that. Giving them new tools, they adapt and adopt these really quickly, and they help move our program forward. If you take it down below our officers, everyone can think of being a crew leader at some point in time, flying out there looking at a fire that's just rolling and knowing there's nothing you can do about it. How great would it be for them to be able to actually get a rate of spread to pass that back to the duty officer? They could start doing some risk mitigation planning. So I was talking about this, and I was saying, man, had this great idea, was born from hanging out with Terry Van Ness way back in the day, and I happened to be talking with Yanik Freeman. Yanik Freeman is kind of like the Franco Nogreen of the Yukon. He is a Renaissance man. He plays in symphonies. He designs things. He builds. But he's also worked with wildlife fire management to help us develop all our decision support tools. When we came to develop a risk system, he was the guy that came forward. When we were working on our common operating picture, he's the guy that stepped up, worked on it. He's got an amazing ability to actually listen to operational people, understand our issues, and then actually help us come up with solutions. And, I was just waxing poetic about this, and without a hesitation he goes, yeah, Johnson, I can build that. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? You're the wizard. What do you mean you can build something like that? And well, actually, he's kind of annoying because he did. He actually turned up and built it. And next thing you know, he came back to the office. And I'm not going to tell you about what he built because I'm going to turn it over to him because I'm making him speak for a bit. But Yanik, tell him about this wonderful frog you built.
Well, thanks, Kris. So when I was first approached with this idea, I realized that it was an adaptation of our already commercialized microcontroller sensor platform that we produced. So I thought, this is really just a repackaging exercise with some customized software thrown in the loop. On the left-hand side here, you can see what is the GPS-enabled reusable rover. And this is what we mount on the outside of the helicopter with a clear view of the sky. On the right, you've got your consumable drop, aka frog,
Yay.
with orange streamer to slow its descent. That's just a ringer of my past as a rocket scientist, launching model rockets as a kid. If ever you put a parachute on a rocket, you never see it again. But if you put a streamer on it, it's just enough resistance to slow the fall down to the ground and prevent it from busting open.
Maybe that's something we should be doing with our Paratech program.
Yeah.
Never mind.
We did get away with cutting holes in parachutes and whatnot, but we always found that streamers were best. I thought, hey, this is just the perfect thing to use on this sort of application.
Innovation.
That streamer, by the way, is a chunk of tarp that got away on us on one of our canoe trips, so it was repurposed. The wind picked up. The screenshot on the right shows the data integration with a common tool that you probably all use, Google Earth. And in there, we surface the real-time data coming in from the frogs on the field. So it's a moving map, and the software that links the two pieces together, the hardware and Google Earth, is called EMD, which we make freely available. It graphs the data in real time as it's coming in from the sensors, and produces a log file, which is your standard CSV format that you can import into Excel and analyze however you like. So the system costs are reduced with this idea of transmitting the data. There's no need to go retrieve the unit. I mean, you're putting it in a place where you don't want to put people. So that's one major cost-saving factor. There was the one I mentioned initially about taking advantage of an already existing platform and plugging in whatever sensors we were looking for. And the other thing is, unlike the rover, the frog doesn't have a GPS on it, so further cutting costs. Because when the unit's dropped from the chopper, the software, the operator will mark the position and the position is recorded. The assumption being that the gravity will take effect and it will go straight down to the ground below the chopper. So, how do they work? I'll give credit to Kris for those little frogs on the left there. My first live version on this only had boring boxes with text. So he spruced it up a little bit. So what you see here is what we refer to as a mesh network on the left. So these frogs are effectively communicating with each other to extend the range from the rover, because your line of sight distance is about 1 kilometer from the rover to whatever frog is within sight. But then that can get relayed on down the chain. So for power conservation, one or more frogs remain in idle state and are pinged by the rover when the data is requested. That way we can minimize or maximize battery time. So this idea of transmitting on down the line is to use the term leapfrogging.
Ooh, there's some copyright infringement going on. Nice.
Yeah, I'll give Ashley credit for that one. She was one of our summer students, right, Kris?
Yep.
That worked with us. Anyways, this is a form of indirect communication, and it's something like the telephone game you might have remembered from childhood. So anyways, it's pretty cool that we can work around this limitation of only 1 kilometer, which is not a lot of range, to the end units by relaying. So how do they do it? The frogs communicate amongst themselves and the rover on a low bandwidth LoRaWAN spectrum. LoRaWAN is the technology that's a collaboration between major companies around the world to drive the Internet of Things revolution. And this is a perfect application for something like this. It's license-free, available on frequencies that work around the world. In North America, we use 950 megahertz at 100 milliwatts. So once the data is received by the rover, it relays it to the laptop on board the chopper via Bluetooth, shorter range, pretty standard. Most laptops come with a Bluetooth connection for processing in our EMD software. The expected battery life of the frog once deployed is about 48 hours on the ground, and the rechargeable rover will go from 8 to 10 hours depending on how much you're pinging units out there. I just want to point out that the data can be logged simultaneously. So if you're pinging more than 1 frog, it will all be logged simultaneously and will appear in the log file after the fact.
Nice.
What do they measure? Well, there's a lot of flavors here, but so the first generation of the device, which we produced in 2021, measured only temperature and pressure at the top there. Particulate matter, humidity, and infrared were later added in a second generation prototype in 2022. So as the name would imply, the system is designed to determine the rate of spread of fire. So, the science is great from, the metrics you get from this stuff, but what we're really after here is the signature, or the croak signature.
Ooh, dad joke number 2.
Yeah, to differentiate between a loss of signal and the actual presence of fire, to mark time 0 when you're doing your speed calculation. So we found that temperatures take too long to equalize with this roaring fire coming towards the unit before it gets incinerated. But that has other applications, which we'll talk about in a minute. But pressure and infrared are near instantaneous readings. They have their ups and downs. Infrared suffers from sunlight interference, unless you happen to be deploying on overcast conditions. Kris and I found this out the hard way. We did a test burn on the second generation devices with a Widrow, and we placed 2 devices on either end, and it happened to be an overcast day. We lit the fire on one end, and you could see, the definite spike in unit A closest to the fire, and then B sometime later. But last year, Robert Westberg, another one of our technicians, tested these on a test burn under sunny conditions, and essentially incinerated the units with no data on the IR, and because the sensors were fully saturated with the amount of infrared radiation coming from the sun. So to give you an idea of how instantaneous the response is for the pressure reading, though, which is probably one of the more interesting metrics to measure at the head of a fire, when you open the helicopter door, that is easily measured by the pressure sensor almost right away. And then when you drop it to the ground, you can actually see the reading increase because you've got more atmosphere above the sensor when it hits the ground. And once it's on the ground, that's your datum for determining the change. Anyways, more details on another application and reusable frog to follow. I'll turn it back over to Kris.
All right, so this one here goes out to my friend Terry Van Ness, because from that conversation sitting in the swamp down at the Hinton Training Center to here we are in 21, starting at sort of the 12 o'clock position, all you need is some good-natured people, a pilot, a little bit of a Karen / Inukshuk, and a bit of a column building in the background. Moving across to about the 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock position, you arm your sensors, taking it down to about the 5 o'clock, you fly out. Kind of like this picture if you look at it, because it's actually representative of what you see. Sometimes you're lucky and there's like power lines, or there's some very easily identifiable points in the land base, which you can get a quick rate of spread from by watching go past. this is pretty much shag carpeting or pile carpeting. So kind of hard pulling a rate of spread off that. You go out, you throw your frogs out, and they start pinging back into your little system. At the 6 o'clock, you're watching the data. You can see the information flowing through where you're on the map. And basically, the frog keeps screaming until it gets burned over and it croaks. Dad joke number 2, repetition. But I like that smile of that guy on the cover there, man, because that is a question that was actually asked in a wildfire community, and it worked through a bunch of different universities and stuff. And this is actually the fruition of it coming through. That is exciting stuff for me. So here we are today. There's Ashley left. We've got some good news coverage from on this. We went and talked to the people at Wildfire Conference of Canada in Edmonton, did some presentations and stuff now. And what I enjoy about it is there's lots of interesting, every time you have a conversation with people, new ideas come forward. But really, why do you care? And ultimately, if you can't answer that one, it makes it kind of tricky as to why we're even doing something like this. So when we're having the conversation with different folks, like I found academics are amazing because suddenly they were asking questions about, how this data can be pulled in for modeling. At what point in time do we start seeing fires draw together? Can this lead to better fire modeling? I bet it could. How about different rate of spreads and stuff? Dynamic fuel models? Well, I bet you could. Switching hats more towards the operational side. What about a duty officer? If the person tells you the fire is moving at 16.6 meters a minute, which works out to 1 kilometer an hour, it's pretty darn easy to figure out how long it's going to take for that fire to hit that community, which is 2 kilometers out. These are real world applications where you can just take some very quick data and make better decisions. As an ignition specialist, man, I would love to find some fluid mechanics engineering background to come back and take this data and build a little chart for me and say, yeah, power of the fire, this is roughly how far that extension is going to go in front. That's wild. Here's data that we can actually start driving better decision support tools. And, I don't want to belabor this, but, honest to goodness, man, when I was a crew leader, I would love to have had something like this to spit out and give me some actual real-time numbers that I could pass back to the duty officers so that I could actually make better decisions, because everyone's been in that spot where you feel kind of helpless, and it's sure nice to be part of the solution when that happens. Where this is all going. So evolution. I'm sitting at Wildfire Canada, and I'm pretty smug because gosh, I got to fly around, throw frogs in a fire. How cool is that? I was talking with a student of wildfire from the IAWF, the International Association of Wildland Fire. And they were looking at me, and it's one of those great times when someone's talking to you and you're not really listening until the moment where you listen. And they're like, oh, Johnson, this is really cool. It's a shame that they're not reusable. And I thought, oh dear, I'm going down some sort of environmental nightmare. You're burning up a little plastic box and it's got a, yeah. And that wasn't it. So we kept talking. They were like, yeah, but if you didn't have to sort of burn it up, you could reuse it and keep getting that information. And I said, yeah, but why would you do that? They were saying, well, what about larger fires and stuff? Isn't there more applications this way? And I was like, well, yeah, but a large fire, I'll just send a crew with a sling cyclometer or a Kestrel or something. But as he kept talking, I realized that I was missing a really interesting observation, that if you can use this leapfrogging technology where one piece of information pops to the next one, it would be very, very easy to set up a network, and you could change the sensor suites and stuff around, and you could actually instrument an entire large fire. And that got me really kind of excited. At the S590, working with Kelsey and Matt and the good folks doing the fire behavior analyst component of it, we talk a lot about, how do you get fuel moisture codes for different microclimates? How do you establish where your danger points are? Pretty much every base in Canada has got that poster on the left talking about common denominators and dangerous conditions. We know that aspect and slope and stuff do play into it. The topography plays into how fire moves forward. Having information like that, real time, coming in directly into the incident command or the team, that would be a fascinating evolution moving forward. Even just because you'd be able to look at it and say, every afternoon at about 17:04, we're getting direct sunlight in this part of the fire and it blows up. Like that's stuff you can take to the bank as an F-band and actually start moving information. Then I started thinking even bigger, like, well, these, leapfrog out, a kilometer or so. If we knew a cold front was approaching from the north and we didn't say have a person sitting in a tower in the north, would we ever consider linking a bunch of frogs out in that general direction so they would be early indicators as a system moves in on us? I don't know. But I know that the only way that these questions come about is by listening to people and having different people pose different ideas. That is where innovation happens. And it's not necessarily the grunt on the ground, and it's not necessarily the grad student or the academic. It's all of us working together to understand the issues. And I took this back and I was talking with Yanik. I said, hey, Wizard, in this rare moment where Kris Johnson actually listened to someone, they brought up this really interesting idea, like, how can we do this? And he looked at me with typical Yanik Wizard eyes and said, Johnson, it's like Lego. You tell me what you want to measure, this can be done. So it's exactly what he said. What would you like to measure? So take it away, Yanik.
Yeah, well, last few points here. So the thing to remember is that this platform is modular, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, think Lego. You can structure it the way you want. So back to the temperature taking a while to equalize. In the sort of application Kris was just mentioning, there's plenty of time for the temperature to equalize if you're monitoring an area, and it'll be fairly accurate. Humidity and IR can be used instead of detecting fire coming before incineration, rather to detect the presence or absence of sunlight on the ground in that particular area. And that version of what you might call the frog would be a reusable type device. And just last night I was thinking of a simplified version of frog for the application where you're trying to determine the rate of growth, where on the outside of the unit, you could actually get rid of all the sensors on the inside. If all you were interested in is the fire here at time X, you could actually put a mechanical thermostat trigger of some sort on the outside, and that would drive the cost down, probably by half of these units. Anyways, there are many other commercially available sensors that could be implemented, and that's sort of where the fire community comes in and what needs there might be out there. Some broad categories to give you an idea that we haven't looked at in these applications would be contact sensors, distance, camera, sound, tilt, inertial, whatever might be relevant to your organization. Just one thing to keep in mind is that with this low bandwidth technology, there's not a lot of bandwidth to transmit a lot of data, but we can probably make something work.
Small packets.
Yeah.
You just cracked me up when you were saying, we could drop down costs. Come on, man, this is a wall-lit fire. What are you talking about? You're the worst owner operator ever.
There's got to be some nerds up there.
Yeah, well, there's definitely. So really what we've done then is we've taken an idea. We've put it through a number of evolutions, and we've now got these working prototypes that, that actually work. And now that we're at this point in time and we're asking people and engaging with people and having this webinar and stuff, we're getting lots of really interesting questions coming back. Like, I'm hoping there's someone on here from Dorntosh or something like that, or, maybe, I don't know, Tamagoosh or something that can come on and ask a question like, hey, could this be measured? Because I'm betting the answer is yes. But what would make me more curious is to, like, why do we want to measure this? Like, how does that benefit us? Like, if we're looking at carcinogens and stuff that impact firefighters, maybe that's information we could be grabbing or keeping track of on different aspects and slopes and stuff, which would be fantastic. And I think the last part I'm going to say just before we roll into our last and final slide is that if you take away anything from this presentation, besides the fact that killing frogs in the name of science is fun, and you can't actually say that without getting into trouble, if you take away anything, it should be that every person has something to contribute if we're going to keep moving fire science forward. You don't necessarily have to be part of a large agency that's, well-resourced in these components. You just have to have an inquisitive mind. You just have to keep asking the right questions and working with people and listening, because that is what really helps move our fire programs forward. And I can guarantee it, there's going to be a time when we're going to run out of, fire trucks and bigger engines to play with. So Matt, we've now hit the question component. I'm hoping, because we don't have access to the chat, that there's something floating around in there. Matt, any wisdom on that?
Thanks for the presentation, Kris. Yeah, no questions yet in the chat.
Oh, awkward.
Feel free, if you do have a question for Kris or Yanik, to put it into the chat now. While we're giving people a minute to think about questions, on one of the comments Kris made early in his presentation about sort of having these national conversations at times when more of the seasonal staff that works for agencies will have an opportunity to see them. And we did have discussions around that and decided it probably wasn't really feasible to hold these throughout the fire season. However, what we are doing is recording all these presentations and making them available via the CIFFC website. So if you do see a presentation throughout the winter that you think, man, it would be really good if all of our crews had a chance to see this as well, you can go find a copy of that recording and show it to them there, part of their training in the season, or if maybe there's a downtime in the middle of the fire season. And with that being said, we've got a couple questions rolling in now. So first one, Kris, is from Brian Weens, and he asks, I may have missed it, but how low cost are these frogs and the associated kit?
Oh, for Brian, we gave a special price, I think. No, I'll let Yanik take that one.
All right, thanks for the question, Brian. So about $100 for the frogs themselves. The roller, of course, has the additional components. It goes for about $200. If you're looking at a reusable version, as we mentioned later on in the talk, there probably about $150.
All right.
Thanks for that. We've got a question from Greg Walker here. He says he doesn't quite understand how you get rate of spread. Is it that you put out a series of them and then get the location and time of fire front arriving at each one?
Greg, Kris Johnson, you dialed it exactly. So basically, if you think back to that slide of the frogs, each one knows where they are, and it tells you all the conditions at that point. And so as the fire front goes over and it gets consumed, that is the time of the fire arrival. And it's just distance equals rate times time.
Thank you. And Razum has a couple of questions. First one, he says, thanks, Kris. Can you talk us through how many of these you have deployed on past fires and what spatial coverage you aimed for?
Well, Razum, don't ask me that question, man. So the answer is not enough. So the very first one, I think we did, I think there was like 5 frogs, and it was just sort of the proof of concept. And like, oh, this is great. I would love to do more on that one. We've done them on prescribed fires and set them up that way. Last summer, the Yukon had an amazing fire season. We had lots of opportunities, but we just didn't have a single body to go out and drop them. What we should be doing is we should be reaching out to our friends from FP Innovation and have them come up and tell us how many we need to drop to get the statistical power and give us the best practices. You know, maybe I'll reach out to FP Innovation's wildfire researching group and ask them that one.
Hey, Kris, you mentioned the fan layout as well. When you're dropping, not knowing what direction the fire might actually be going.
Yeah. Oh, and that's another interesting thing. So when we actually deployed it on the fire, the first one in Carmax 5, and we were playing around that one there, we were on the southwest corner of the fire, and the fire was flirting mostly between calm driven with a little bit of wind push and stuff on that one, but it got into a heavy pocket of conifer just to the north. And so as the fire was coming towards it, it actually started getting pulled back away from it, so it slowed it down. As a fire behavior analyst, what amazed me was what I would have estimated the actual fire rate of spread would have actually been a lot higher than it actually was when we actually ran the numbers. So that was kind of interesting. So it's a great question, Razim. It's, every time we do this, we learn something new. Same thing like we're playing with those IR sensors, like the idea of having sort of a secondary qualifier to make sure that the fire actually croaked from being consumed by a frog versus, you know, eaten by a bear or something, or some other weird thing on the ground, was a great idea. But then we realized that sunlight can mess with it. But I think any of the people that play in fire long enough would know that, you know, having direct sunlight on something and being able to record that is actually its own value in and of itself. So yeah, good question. Are there other questions floating around out there?
A number of them, actually, yeah. So
what? Oh dear.
From Razim. that's more research centric. Have you considered an in-fire anemometer? That's something we've talked about in our experimental fire instrumentation.
Yeah, no, I've talked with Steve Havensgaard about this, and they definitely exist, but now we're looking at doing the static in one position, probably increased price for that. But yeah, it's a great idea. Haven't done it. Let's go play with our friends at FP Innovation.
All right, thanks. We've got one from Steve Taylor. How far are you transmitting? Have you had any problems receiving signal in the field?
Oh, I'll leave that one to Yanik.
I'll take that one. So at 100 milliwatts, we're definitely constrained in the license-free spectrum. A kilometer line of sight, which you easily have from a helicopter's vantage point. But when you're testing on the ground with a network of these things, obviously tree cover will get in the way. You might expect half that range, which is where or 3/4 of that range is where the leapfrogging concept comes in, where you just make sure that they're intervisible beyond the range from the rover.
Nice.
I will point out that at 868 megahertz, which is a legal frequency you can use in Europe and other places, you've got about 5 times the amount of power there, so you could go 5 kilometers, but not legally here. Not if you want to pay for the.
They're recording you, buddy. Careful. Okay, I see the next question come from Dave Schroeder. I just gave him the wow face. Like, there's another weird. It says, how heavy is the rover? Can you deploy with the drone? The actual weight of it, I'll let Yanik speak to. To me, it looks like a rotund smartphone. How heavy is it?
It's not terribly heavy. You could certainly drop it from a drone, and I've thought of doing the same. As for actual weight, I'm going to say somewhere around 200 grams, maybe 150. I haven't measured it to you.
Dave, fantastic and interesting conversation or question that one, because yeah, having a drone or something like that can capture all that information. You wouldn't have to strap a helicopter. I kind of enjoyed flying around, actually watching the flame front rolling forward and waiting for those things to be cooked up, but fantastic. I like it.
Yeah, 2 more questions. And first is another from Steve. He says, need 3 arrival times to triangulate rate of spread and spread direction and location of the sensors, of course. So I guess more of a comment than a question.
Valid. I'm just going to give him a thumbs up on that one.
That would kind of play into the fan-shaped deployment we were talking about too.
Yeah, and that was one of the ones, it ties back to what Razim was saying. Like, every time we do something like this, we learn more. Like, what is the optimal arrangement? So we found out for the first one is like, oh yeah, like lining them up in a line is probably not the best idea. Doing a series of sort of fans going out from the area so you can start capturing it as the sides below is actually kind of empty. But let's take it down to our friend Richard Carr. CFS heavy. I like this.
Yeah, our last question is from Richard, and he's saying, excuse my wandering mind if I missed this, but how often can a frog transmit data? I'm curious if they can provide lateral and vertical movement data while in the atmosphere.
Okay, so the frogs are pinged when the rover needs data. So they remain in idle state until, so it's sort of a, hey, are you there? Yes, I'm here. Here's the data. So using that strategy, they can maintain a low power mode until requested. I'm just not quite understanding the second part of that.
So if I understand, Richard, and you can throw down on this one, what you're asking about is, can they talk about like the different layers of the atmosphere above it? No, not the sensors we currently have on there. All we've got is just sort of barometric pressure in this one. But interesting idea. If you can ask it, I'm sure someone's got a solution.
Yeah, I guess I can chip in. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, got you 5x5, my friend.
Yep. I suppose, using temperature and pressure, you can probably get a sense of the altitude of the thing above the ground, I guess, if necessary. We don't know how accurate it might be, but be interesting to, I don't know if how accurate the GPS is, if you can provide a lateral movement of the thing while it's falling, it might help identify things that are going on in the atmosphere that may contribute to fire, impending downdrafts or updrafts and things like that.
It sounds like you should come on up and swat some northern bugs, my friend.
So the frogs themselves don't have a GPS unit, right? The GPS position is recorded from the rover's position at the time of drop. Beyond that, we have no XY on the unit. once it's dropped. The accuracy is about 10 meters. It's not differentially corrected.
All right, thanks. 10 meters is decent.
And we got something from Jason.
Ooh.
Thanks, Kris and Yanik. He's actually the guy behind all the brains on this one. No, it does not tell you the intensity at each sensor type thing. Intensity, you need the weight of the fuels and a bunch of other things to sort of calculate that out. This just basically says, I'm alive, I'm dead. But I'm sure if we can ask the question, someone out there is working on some sort of heuristic to develop something like that. In most of these scenarios where you'd be deploying it, we're probably dealing with an intensity class 6 fire, full crown fire at this point. But maybe there again, I'm limiting the application. Maybe we should be looking at these lower intensity, wind-driven surface type fires as well. So that's an interesting point. Once again, my mind was too closed. Thanks, Jay.
Okay, and that is all the questions we have right now.
Just one.
So,
Matt, I want to circle back to you on one thing there. You did say that all these presentations are available for people, operational staff that are coming back on. That's available to non-members as well. Is that correct? They can to download this or watch them?
so Heather can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, the CIFFC website is available to the public. So anyone who knows about it can access it.
Thank you. That's wonderful, man. I know some other people that are not paid members of the CIFFC family that would probably really enjoy some of the previous presentations. So that's great. I think we have one more question coming up here. What's that one?
Yeah, how close is this technology from moving from the prototype stage to a production model that would be readily available for other agencies? From Forrest Barrett.
It's available now. we're producing it now for the Yukon government, and we could for other agencies. If you want, you can check out the website that you saw earlier in the slides there for details on that.
The one thing I would say, Forrest, it's not like walking into like Walmart or 7-Eleven. You can't just go grab the 20 off the shelf to quick try it. It takes a little bit of planning. Yeah, exactly. Got it still building at this point in time, but what we're finding fascinating is that what's that thing about expectation creep when you work with vendors? Every time you build something, we're like, hey, Yanik, could you X, Y, Z it? And that's been kind of a tricky process there for him, but we'll see what happens on that one. Yanik, you put the URL in there. And hey, Greg Walker, thanks back at you, buddy. Appreciate that. Parks alumni. So Yanik's going to throw that in, and you were going to do one last plug. I think we've back to the next webinar, and I think we've come to the end of our sojourn here today.
Hey, Matt, before you do that, I have a quick question. Kris, how much data do you already have?
Oh, an accurate number would be difficult to gauge on the fly, my friend. So we've got 5 different utilizations or deployments of them at this point in time, and they range from actually free burning wildfires to prescribed fires to burning piles and stuff that way. And it's a bit of a hodgepodge right now. So yeah, I would have to go back and actually look at that. I'm hoping someone like planning is going to come along and say, I've got this grad student that's looking for data, and I can just vomit it all towards them.
Well, that was kind of the reason I'm raising the question is, if there's researchers out there that are interested, then, there's already data collected. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And there's one hand up. Mamoon?
Yeah, Mamoon, have you got a question?
Might just be an artifact, Matt. Go ahead.
Okay. And yeah, Maddie, absolutely same for the IMIT session there, because data management is one of the things. There's no point measuring something if you're not going to do something with it, because like you said, it'll just be sitting in a pile. But the ability to even proof of concept that we can be grabbing, like the barometric pressure as the head fire rolls into forward, I think that's a huge step forward. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks a lot, Kris and Yanik, for your presentation. That was really interesting. And as I mentioned at the beginning, everyone keep an eye open for an invite to our last national conversation, which again will be based on the novel by Tara McGee and Amy Cardinal Christensen, First Nations Wildfire Evacuations, A Guide for Communities and External Agencies. With that, I think we'll wrap up for today. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. And just a shout out to Heather for actually helping coordinate this, as well as Matt and Charlene. You guys have done a good job. You stay satisfactory.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.